I don't care who you think you are, Mr. Hayes. This notice says your pool requires a certified inspection by a county licensed professional within 72 hours, or we will begin fining you $500 a day. The voice, a grating symphony of entitlement and stale cigarette smoke, belonged to Karen, the newly self-appointed queen of our sleepy suburban homeowners association. She stood on the very edge of my property line, a solid plus-sized woman in a floral muumuu that looked like it had lost a fight with a pack of rabid highlighters. Her arms were crossed so tightly over her chest that her fists were turning white, and she brandished a crumpled piece of paper as if it were a royal decree. The afternoon sun glinted off her oversized sunglasses, hiding her eyes but not the sneer that twisted her lips. My meticulously manicured lawn, a source of quiet pride, felt violated by her mere presence. The air, thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and chlorine from the very pool in question, now carried the acrid tang of confrontation. I had been enjoying a rare moment of peace, a cold glass of iced tea in hand, watching my golden retriever, Gunner, chase a lazy butterfly. That peace was now shattered, replaced by the low thrum of anger that I had spent years learning to control. This woman, who had been president of the HOA for all of 6 months, was threatening my home, my finances, and the sanctuary I had built after 20 years of serving my country. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was breathtaking. She was pointing at the sparkling blue water of my custom-built pool, a project I had poured my own sweat and expertise into, a masterpiece of engineering and safety that far exceeded any county code, and calling it a liability. The irony was so thick you could have paved a driveway with it. If you've ever dealt with an HOA president on a power trip, someone who gets a thrill from wielding a tiny sliver of authority like a weapon, then hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. You are definitely not going to want to miss how this particular story of bureaucratic overreach ends. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, letting the cold glass steady my hand, and met her unseen gaze. The thing about bullies is that they feed on reaction, on fear and intimidation. They expect you to crumble, to apologize, to comply without question. I had faced men with far more power and far deadlier weapons than a wrinkled violation notice, and I learned one simple truth. You never let them see you sweat. You stand your ground. You use their own momentum against them, and you wait for the perfect moment to trip them into the hole they've dug for themselves. Karen had just handed me a shovel. My name is Mark Hayes. For 2 decades, I was a chief petty officer in the United States Navy Seabees, the construction battalion. We build and we fight, that's the motto. I've built runways in the middle of deserts under rocket fire and constructed field hospitals in hurricane-ravaged landscapes. I understand codes, regulations, and the unyielding laws of physics better than most people understand their own email inbox. When I retired, my wife Sarah and I wanted one thing: quiet. We found a nice corner lot in a subdivision called Willow Creek Estates, a name that promised a tranquility it had until recently delivered. The HOA was a sleepy, barely there entity, mostly concerned with making sure nobody painted their house an offensive color. Then 6 months ago, Karen was elected president on a platform of restoring community standards, which apparently meant making everyone else's life as miserable as her own. We chose this house for its large, private backyard. The first thing I did after we closed was design and build the pool myself. It wasn't just a hole in the ground filled with water, it was my retirement project. I engineered a variable speed pump system that was 30% more energy efficient than required, installed a saline chlorinator to be gentler on the skin, and designed a multi-layered safety system with a self-latching gate, a pool alarm, and a safety cover strong enough to hold the weight of a small car. The plumbing was a work of art. The rebar grid in the gunite shell was over-spec'd, and the electrical work was grounded and bonded to a degree that would make a NASA engineer weep with joy. After it was finished, I decided to turn a lifelong skill set into a small business to keep myself sharp. I went through the rigorous certification process and became a licensed commercial and residential pool inspector for the counties. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a comprehensive ordeal involving written exams on fluid dynamics, electrical codes, chemical safety, and structural integrity, plus a hands-on practical exam. And due to the semi-rural nature of our area, I happened to be the only person in all of Oak Haven County who held this specific license. It was a nice little side gig, inspecting pools for real estate transactions and for the few community centers in the area. It was quiet work, just like I wanted. So when Karen stood there jabbing her finger toward my crystal clear pool, her voice dripping with condescending authority, I had to suppress a laugh. It was the kind of absurd, Kafka-esque situation you read about online but never expect to find camped out on your own front lawn. I placed my iced tea on the porch railing, giving myself another moment to choose my words carefully. "Karen," I began, my voice calm and even, a tone I had perfected for de-escalating situations that were about to get loud. "I appreciate your diligence in upholding the community standards." Starting with a compliment, even a backhanded one, can sometimes disarm them. It did not work. "Don't you patronize me, Mr. Hayes," she snapped, the piece of paper trembling in her grip. "This is an official notice. Your unpermitted and likely dangerous pool," she said the word pool, as if it were a vile curse, "needs a safety and compliance inspection immediately." I let the accusation hang in the air for a moment. Unpermitted? I had the full permit package signed off and stamped by every relevant county official, filed neatly in my office. The plans I submitted were so detailed the county clerk had joked about using them as a training manual for new hires. I decided to address the core issue, the beautiful central irony of her entire demand. "I see," I said, nodding slowly. "And this inspection needs to be done by a county licensed professional, is that correct?" "That's what the notice says," she sneered, as if speaking to a child. "There are no exceptions. It's for the safety of the children." She gestured vaguely around the neighborhood, a neighborhood in which the youngest resident was a college student who came home for Christmas. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. I flipped it open, not to my driver's license, but to the hard plastic card issued by the Oak Haven County Department of Licensing and Regulation. I held it up for her to see. "Well, Karen," I said, letting the corner of my mouth twitch into a small, controlled smile, "it seems we have a solution. This is my county license. It certifies me as a commercial and residential pool inspector. In fact, I'm the only one in the county. So, when would you like me to inspect my own pool? I can probably fit it in tomorrow morning. I'll even give the HOA a 10% discount on my usual fee." The silence that followed was glorious. The color drained from Karen's face, leaving behind a pasty, mottled canvas of pure rage. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish gasping for air on a dock. The oversized sunglasses couldn't hide the furious twitch that started in her left eye. She snatched her crumpled notice back and squinted at my license, her lips moving silently as she read my name and the bold letters spelling out Certified Pool Inspector. For a fleeting moment, I thought logic might actually prevail. I thought she might see the utter foolishness of her position, perhaps offer a grumbled apology and retreat to her beige-colored castle to find a new peasant to harass. I had severely underestimated the depths of her entitlement. "That," she finally sputtered, her voice rising in pitch, "is a conflict of interest. You can't inspect your own property. That's illegal." It wasn't, of course. There was nothing in the county regulations or the HOA bylaws that prohibited a qualified professional from certifying their own work, especially on a residential property. The license was a testament to competence, not a restriction on it. "Actually, it's not illegal, Karen," I replied, my voice still infuriatingly calm. "It might be unusual, but it's perfectly legal. The bylaws simply state the inspection must be done by a licensed professional. They don't say that professional can't also be the homeowner." I had read the HOA covenants, all 128 pages of them, before we bought the house. I always read the fine print. "I will not have it," she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure crumbling into a full-blown tantrum. This is a mockery of our rules. You will hire someone from another county to come here and inspect this death trap." She waved a dismissive, chubby hand at my pool. "I will not. The bylaws specify a professional license by Oak Haven County. If you'd like to propose an amendment to the bylaws at the next annual meeting to include out-of-county inspectors, you're welcome to do so. Until then, the current rules stand." Using her own precious rules against her was like pouring salt on a slug. She recoiled, her face contorting with a fresh wave of fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Mr. Hayes, with your military background and your little clipboard?" The jab at my service was a low blow, but I expected nothing less. "This isn't over. The fines will start in 72 hours. $500 a day. We'll see how clever you feel when we put a lien on your house." And with that, she spun around, her moo-moo swirling dramatically, and stomped back across my lawn, leaving a trail of righteous indignation in her wake. I watched her go, a strange sense of calm settling over me. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war, a war over rules, over control, and over a beautiful, perfectly safe swimming pool. And if there's one thing the CB's taught me, it's that you don't start a fight with a builder on his home turf. You'll find it's built on a foundation you can't possibly crack. The first official notice of a fine arrived in our mailbox exactly 73 hours later. A crisp white envelope that felt heavier than it should. It was a form letter, filled with sterile, bureaucratic language detailing my failure to comply with HOA Directive 7.4b regarding mandatory safety inspections for private aquatic recreation facilities. The fine was, as promised, $500. A second letter arrived the next day, and a third the day after that. Karen was nothing if not punctual. My wife, Sarah, was starting to get worried. She was a kind, gentle soul. A first-grade teacher who believed in seeing the good in everyone, a trait that was being severely tested by our new neighbor. "Mark, this is $1,500 already," she said, laying the 3 envelopes out on our kitchen island like evidence in a crime scene. "Can't we just pay someone from Northwood County to come and do it? It would be cheaper than 1 week of these fines." "It's not about the money, Sarah," I said, looking out the window at the subject of all this turmoil. The pool was placid, its surface shimmering under the morning sun. "It's about the principle. If I let her bully me on this, where does it end? Will she demand I hire an out-of-county arborist to inspect my oak tree, a geologist to certify the stability of my foundation? She's manufacturing a problem and a solution that benefits no one but her own ego. We give in now, and we're giving her a blank check to harass us forever." I sat down at my desk and began to compose my official response. I wasn't just going to argue, I was going to build a case. I typed up a formal letter addressed to the HOA Board of Directors, CCing every member individually. In it, I calmly and methodically dismantled Karen's position. I cited the specific bylaw she was referencing and highlighted the exact wording. Must be inspected annually by a professional licensed and certified by Oak Haven County. I attached a high-resolution color copy of my license, front and back. Then I went a step further. I spent an hour that morning conducting a full official inspection of my own pool. I tested the water chemistry, checked the pump pressure, tested the GFCI outlets, inspected the gate latch, measured the fence height, and ran a diagnostic on the alarm system. I filled out my own company's official multi-page inspection report, checking every box and making detailed notes. Everything was, of course, in perfect condition. I signed and dated the report, then drove to the bank and had it notarized. I attached a copy of this completed notarized report to my letter, and then for the finishing touch, I created an invoice. Hayes Pool Inspection Services, it read at the top. The bill was addressed to the Willow Creek Estates HOA. The line item read, "For professional services rendered as per HOA Directive 7.4b, 1 Residential Pool Safety and Compliance Inspection." The total was my standard fee, $250. I concluded my letter by stating that since I had fully complied with the directive, I expected the baseless fines to be rescinded immediately and for my enclosed invoice to be paid within 30 days, as was standard business practice. I sent the entire package via certified mail, return receipt requested. It was a quiet, paperwork-based declaration that I would not be an easy target. The response came not in the mail, but in the form of a community-wide email from Karen a few days later. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive propaganda. "Dear neighbors," it began, "it has come to my attention that some residents believe that rules are for other people. In the interest of transparency and the safety of our community, I must inform you that the property at 121 Oak Lane, my address, is currently in violation of critical safety protocols regarding its backyard pool. The homeowner, despite multiple warnings, has refused to obtain a valid, impartial safety inspection. As president, my primary concern is the well-being of our residents, especially the children who might wander near such an uncertified hazard. Until this issue is resolved, I urge you to be extra vigilant. The HOA board is exploring all options, including legal action, to compel compliance. She had just publicly declared my home a danger to children. She had doxed me to the entire neighborhood and painted me as a reckless, arrogant scofflaw. The fines continued to arrive daily, but they were no longer just financial threats. They were symbols of a targeted harassment campaign. The battle lines were no longer on my front lawn. They were drawn through the entire community. And Karen had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. This was no longer about a pool. Karen had escalated this from a petty bureaucratic squabble to a public defamation campaign. She was using the official HOA communication channels to slander me and create a false narrative of danger around my home. This was a grave error on her part. While she was busy playing the tyrant, I was busy thinking like a strategist. It was time to gather intelligence. My first stop was the county records office. I spent a full afternoon poring over the publicly available documents for the Willow Creek Estates HOA. The articles of incorporation, the meeting minutes for the past 5 years, and most importantly, the annual financial statements. For the first few years, everything was boringly predictable. Line items for lawn care, insurance, minor repairs to the community mailbox kiosk. Then about 6 months ago, when Karen took over, the spending patterns changed. A new, significant expense appeared: community beautification projects. The payments were substantial, totaling over $30,000 in just half a year. And they all went to one vendor, a company called Karen's Blooming Gardens. The name was so brazen it was almost comical. A quick search on the state's business registry website confirmed my suspicions. Karen's Blooming Gardens was a sole proprietorship, registered just 1 week after she was elected HOA president. The registered agent and sole owner? Karen Miller, her maiden name. She was funneling HOA dues directly into her own pocket under the guise of beautification. The problem was there was no beautification to be seen. The entrance to the subdivision had the same sad-looking boxwoods it had for years, and the small common area was just a patch of grass that the regular landscaping company mowed. Where was this $30,000 going? My next step was to talk to my neighbors. I started with the people on either side of me, then worked my way down the street. I didn't lead with my own grievance. I just asked how they were finding life under the new HOA management. The floodgates opened. I met Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow who had received a violation notice because her wind chimes were deemed a source of noise pollution. Mr. Chen, a young father, was fined because his son's plastic tricycle was left on the driveway for 3 hours. The Rodriguez family was ordered to repaint their front door because the new shade of white was out of compliance with the approved palette, even though it was indistinguishable from the old one. Everyone had a story. Everyone felt intimidated and isolated. They were all paying their small, unjust fines just to make the problem go away. I had found my army. My key ally emerged in the form of George Peterson, a retired CPA who lived 3 doors down. George was a quiet, meticulous man in his late 70s who spent most of his days tending his prize-winning roses. When I told him about my situation and what I'd found in the financial records, his eyes lit up with a fire I hadn't seen before. "I knew it," he hissed, his voice a low whisper. "I've been looking at the quarterly statements they send out. The numbers never felt right. The expenditures were going up, but the reserve fund was shrinking. She refused to provide detailed receipts at the last meeting, said it was too cumbersome." He invited me in and we spread the financial documents I had printed across his dining room table. For the next 2 hours, George, with his decades of forensic accounting experience, walked me through the statements, pointing out red flags I had missed. The payments to her company were always just under the amount that would require a second board member's signature. The descriptions were laughably vague. Phase 1 planting, seasonal color enhancement, soil enrichment program. "This is classic self-dealing, Mark," George said, tapping a thick stack of invoices I had obtained through a public records request. "She's not just breaking HOA bylaws, she's likely committing wire fraud and embezzlement. But we need more than just these papers. We need to show that the work was never done." So we hatched a plan. George would use his expertise to draft a formal letter to the board demanding a full independent audit, citing specific financial codes from the bylaws. Meanwhile, I would document the current state of all community property. I spent the next weekend with a camera, taking hundreds of high-resolution time-stamped photos of the entrance, the common areas, the mailbox kiosk, every square inch of property that the HOA was responsible for maintaining. I photographed the tired old boxwoods, the patchy grass, the faded paint. There was no sign of $30,000 worth of beautification. We now had the financial trail, a coalition of aggrieved homeowners, and photographic evidence. Karen thought she was fighting a war with one stubborn veteran. She was about to find out she was fighting a war with an entire community, and we were armed with receipts. With my evidence mounting, it was time to move from defense to offense. I wasn't going to let this battle be fought in the court of Karen's biased email newsletters or through an endless stream of baseless fines. I needed to force the conflict into a neutral, legally binding arena where facts, not feelings, were the currency. The HOA bylaws, the very document she worshipped, would be my weapon. I called an old friend from my time in the service, a guy named Dave who had left the Navy and become a lawyer specializing in real estate and contract law. I laid out the whole situation for him over the phone. The pool, the license, the fines, the public shaming, and the financial discoveries. After a long pause, I heard him let out a low whistle. "Mark, this woman is a walking lawsuit," Dave said. "She's not just violating the bylaws, she's engaging in selective enforcement, harassment, and libel. And this financial stuff, that's criminal. You have her cold." Dave confirmed my interpretation of the bylaws. The clause about inspections was airtight in my favor. But he pointed out another, even more powerful section I had overlooked. Article 12, Dispute Resolution. It stated that before any legal action could be taken by the HOA against a homeowner, the dispute must first be submitted to professional mediation. Crucially, it also stipulated that if the homeowner's position was upheld in mediation, the entire cost of the mediator would be borne by the HOA. "This is your checkmate move," Dave explained. "You formally demand mediation based on her harassment and the improper fines. She can't refuse without violating the covenants. It forces her to a table with a neutral third party where her blustering and threats won't work. She'll have to present actual evidence that you've violated the rules, which she can't do," he continued. "And while you're at it, we'll have George's formal request for an audit sent to the other board members. We hit them on two fronts simultaneously. You challenge her authority on a personal level, while he challenges her financial integrity on a corporate level. The rest of the board will have to choose a side, go down with the sinking ship or save themselves." Following Dave's advice, I drafted 2 more official documents. The first was a formal demand for mediation, addressed to the HOA board. I cited Article 12 and detailed my claim that the president of the HOA was engaged in a campaign of targeted harassment, levying fines without legal basis, and refusing to accept my full compliance with Directive 7.4b. I stated that I was ceasing payment of the illegitimate fines, which now totaled over $5,000 pending the outcome of the mediation. The second document was a cease and desist letter. In it, I demanded that Karen immediately stop publishing defamatory statements about me and my property via the official HOA email list. I cited her email by date and quoted her exact words, explaining that her false claims of my home being a hazard constituted libel and had caused damage to my reputation among my neighbors. I gave her 48 hours to issue a full public retraction to the same email list. Both letters were sent via certified mail to Karen and every other board member. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to walk into it. The response was faster and more explosive than I could have hoped for. Less than a day after the mail was delivered, another email blasted out to the entire neighborhood. The subject line in all caps read, "Urgent. Special HOA meeting to address rogue homeowner." Karen was panicking. Instead of following the bylaws and agreeing to mediation, she was trying to use her public platform to crush the rebellion. The email was a frantic, paranoid rant. She accused me of legal bullying, of trying to bankrupt our community with frivolous demands, and of launching a personal vendetta to undermine the authority of this board. She announced a special meeting to be held in the community clubhouse in 1 week's time. The agenda? To discuss the ongoing violations of resident Mark Hayes and to vote on further legal action, including the foreclosure of his property. She had just called my bluff, or so she thought. What she didn't realize was that she hadn't called my bluff at all. She had just handed me the perfect stage, a public forum where I could present my evidence not just to a mediator, but to every single one of our neighbors. She intended to make an example of me. She had no idea that we were about to make an example of her. The week leading up to the meeting was a flurry of quiet, coordinated activity. George and I, along with a half dozen other wronged homeowners, formed a small committee. We went door to door, not with angry rhetoric, but with calm, factual printouts. We showed them the bylaws. We showed them the financial statements. We showed them my notarized inspection report next to Karen's violation notices. We didn't tell them what to think. We just gave them the information Karen had been hiding. The tide was turning. People who had been afraid to speak up were now quietly promising to attend the meeting. They were angry about their own petty fines, but they were furious about the potential embezzlement. It was no longer just my fight. It was everyone's. The night of the special meeting, the community clubhouse, a small, sterile room usually reserved for children's birthday parties, was packed to capacity. The air was thick with tension and the smell of cheap coffee from a percolator in the corner. People were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. I had never seen more than 10 people at an HOA meeting before. Tonight, there were at least 70. Sarah was by my side, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm. George sat on my other side, a neat manila folder resting on his lap. We had set up a small projector and screen at the front of the room, a piece of equipment I had donated for the evening. Karen and the other 3 board members sat at a folding table at the front, looking flustered by the unexpectedly massive turnout. The other members, a timid-looking man named Frank and 2 women who always seemed to be in Karen's shadow, avoided making eye contact. Karen, however, looked energized by the crowd. She clearly misinterpreted the attendance as a sign of support for her crusade. She wore a power suit that was a shade of electric blue so vibrant it hurt the eyes. She banged a small gavel on the table, the sound barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "Order, order! This special meeting of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice booming with self-importance. "The sole purpose of this meeting is to address the flagrant and continuous violations of Mr. Mark Hayes of 121 Oak Lane." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at me. The room fell silent. "Mr. Hayes has refused to comply with basic safety regulations," she continued, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "He has responded to official notices with mockery and frivolous legal threats. He wants to operate outside the rules that bind the rest of us, putting our property values and, more importantly, our safety at risk. The board is therefore proposing a vote to authorize our legal counsel to begin foreclosure proceedings to remove this blight from our community." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Foreclosure. It was the nuclear option, a threat so wildly out of proportion to the alleged crime that it was laughable, but she wasn't laughing. She was deadly serious. "Before we vote," she said, a smug smile playing on her lips, "does Mr. Hayes have anything to say in his defense?" This was the moment she had been waiting for. My public humiliation. She expected me to stammer, to rage, to make a fool of myself. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding a steady, disciplined rhythm. I walked to the front of the room and turned to face not her, but my neighbors. "Thank you, Karen," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the silent room. "I do have a few things to say. First, let's address the issue of the pool inspection." I clicked a button on my laptop and the projector whirred to life. The first image on the screen was a crystal clear photo of my county inspector license. As you've been told, the HOA requires a pool inspection by a county licensed professional. This is my license. I am the only one in the county. I clicked again. The next image was the notarized multi-page inspection report for my pool. This is the inspection report, completed and notarized, declaring my pool to be 100% compliant with all county and state codes. It was submitted to the board weeks ago. So, the claim that I have refused to comply is, to put it plainly, a lie. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw people nodding, whispering to each other. Karen's smile faltered. "That's a conflict of—" She started to interrupt. "Please, Karen, you asked if I had anything to say. I'm not finished," I said, holding up a hand without looking at her. The crowd's focus was entirely on me. This was never about a pool. This has been a campaign of harassment, and I'm not the only one. I clicked through a series of slides, each one showing a picture of a neighbor's house next to the absurd violation notice they had received. Mrs. Gable's wind chimes, the Chen's tricycle, the Rodriguez's white door. With each slide, a new voice from the crowd would call out, "That's me!" or "She did that to us too." The energy in the room shifted from quiet tension to a low, collective growl of anger. "But even that," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "isn't the real reason we're here tonight." I took a deep breath. "The real reason is about where our money, your money, is going." I clicked the remote again. The HOA's summary financial statement appeared on the screen. "As you know, our dues went up by 15% this year. We were told it was for community beautification. I'd like to ask you all to take a look at these photos." I then displayed the series of time-stamped pictures I had taken of the subdivision entrance and common areas, the sad boxwoods, the patchy grass. This is what our community property looks like. Now let's look at the expenditures. The next slide was a list of payments from the HOA account, line after line, all made out to one company, Karen's Blooming Gardens. The total at the bottom of the page read $32,450. The room was utterly silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. "I was curious," I continued, "so I looked up this company. It was founded 6 months ago, right after the last election, and it's registered to a Ms. Karen Miller." I paused, letting the name sink in, which, as some of you may know, is our board president's maiden name. The silence broke. It was not a murmur this time. It was an uproar. Chaos erupted. The room exploded in a cacophony of angry shouts and accusations. People were on their feet, pointing at the screen, then at a stunned and rapidly paling Karen. "Thief!" someone yelled from the back. "You stole our money!" shouted another. The other board members looked like they had just seen a ghost, their faces a mixture of shock and terror. They started inching their chairs away from Karen as if her corruption were contagious. Karen, for her part, was frantically banging her useless gavel. "Order! This is a lie! It's a smear campaign! This is a personal attack!" She screeched, but her voice was lost in the tumult. I stood calmly at the front, letting the fire I had ignited burn. I had presented the facts. The community was now delivering the verdict. After a minute or two of pure pandemonium, George Peterson stood up. At nearly 80 years old, he commanded a certain respect. He raised a hand, and slowly, The room began to quiet down, the residents eager to hear from one of their own. "If I may," George said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying a weight of authority that Karen's gavel lacked. He walked to the front and stood beside me. "My name is George Peterson. For 42 years I was a certified public accountant. I have reviewed the documents Mr. Hayes obtained, and I can confirm what they strongly suggest." He turned to look directly at Karen, who was now sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights. "This isn't just a violation of HOA bylaws regarding conflicts of interest. This is evidence of embezzlement and fraud, funneling homeowner dues into a personal company for services that were clearly never rendered is a crime. A serious one." The word crime hung in the air, electric and dangerous. Karen's face, which had been red with anger, was now ashen with fear. It's a misunderstanding," she stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. "A clerical error. The landscaping work was delayed due to supply chain issues." The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting to the intelligence of everyone in the room, that it was met with a round of scornful laughter. Mrs. Gable, the sweet old lady with the wind chimes, stood up, her small frame trembling with indignation. "Delayed? Karen, I saw you at the garden center last month buying petunias for your own house with the HOA credit card. I thought it was odd, but now I see you've been stealing from us to fund your own garden." That personal testimony was the final nail in her coffin. The board members, desperate to save themselves, immediately turned on her. "I had no idea about this, Karen." Frank, the timid one, blurted out, "You told us the invoices were for the main entrance redesign." "We need to see the receipts. All of them," another board member demanded. But there were no receipts to see, no redesign to point to. There was only the undeniable evidence on the screen and the testimony of her neighbors. A man I didn't know, a large fellow with a booming voice, stood up. "I make a motion for an immediate vote of no confidence in Karen as board president." "Second," came a chorus of voices from all corners of the room. Before Karen could even object, the man continued, "And I further move that we freeze all HOA accounts immediately and authorize a full independent forensic audit of the last year's finances." "Second," the shouting was unanimous. A vote was hastily called. It wasn't even close. By a show of hands, Karen was removed from her position as president, effective immediately. The vote to authorize the audit was also unanimous. She sat there, stunned and silent, as her tiny empire crumbled around her in less than 15 minutes. The power she had wielded with such arrogance was gone, stripped away by the very people she had sought to control. She was no longer the queen of Willow Creek Estates. She was just a woman in a ridiculous blue suit, exposed as a petty thief in a room full of her victims. Her reign was over. The meeting ended with her slinking out the back door, avoiding the furious glares of her former subjects. She didn't look at me, but I felt her hatred like a physical force. It didn't matter. The war was won. Now it was just a matter of cleaning up the mess. The fallout from that meeting was swift and decisive. George Peterson was immediately nominated and unanimously voted in as the interim HOA president. His first official act was to hire an independent forensic accounting firm, just as the community had demanded. His second was to draft a formal letter on behalf of the entire HOA, retracting all fines against me and the other residents Karen had targeted, accompanied by a sincere apology for the harassment we had endured. It was a complete and total vindication. The forensic audit took 2 weeks, and the results were even worse than we had imagined. It turned out Karen had embezzled over $80,000 in her short 6-month reign. The Karen's Blooming Garden scheme was just the tip of the iceberg. She had used the HOA credit card for personal groceries, gasoline, online shopping sprees, and even a weekend trip to a spa resort, which she had coded as off-site board training. She had falsified invoices, forged signatures, and cooked the books with a level of audacity that was truly impressive. The auditors found that she had used a significant portion of the stolen funds to finance a massive, unpermitted, and dangerously constructed water feature in her own backyard. It was a grotesque monstrosity of fake rocks, cheap plastic waterfalls, and a murky pond that was a breeding ground for mosquitoes. The electrical work was shoddy, with exposed wires near the water, and the whole structure was unstable. It was, in a bitter twist of irony, the exact kind of death trap she had accused my pool of being. Armed with the auditor's comprehensive report, the new HOA board had no choice but to turn the matter over to the authorities. The local police department's financial crimes unit took over, and within a month, Karen was formally charged with multiple counts of felony embezzlement and fraud. Her carefully constructed world of petty tyranny and financial deceit came crashing down. Her husband, who claimed to have known nothing about it, divorced her. The bank foreclosed on their house. She was utterly ruined, a pariah in the community she once ruled with an iron fist. My life, meanwhile, returned to a wonderful state of normalcy, but with a few key improvements. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed dramatically. People started talking to each other again. The sense of fear and paranoia that Karen had cultivated was replaced by a renewed sense of community. We had a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate, and George, in his first official address as the new president, publicly thanked me for having the courage to stand up and fight back. I became something of a local hero, the guy who took down the HOA dragon. It was a title I was uncomfortable with, but I was glad that my actions had helped restore peace to our quiet little corner of the world. The legal loose ends were tied up neatly. My lawyer, Dave, sent a final letter to the old board members who had sat by and done nothing. Faced with potential civil liability for their negligence, they quickly agreed to have the HOA's insurance pay for my modest legal fees. The check arrived a few weeks later, a final satisfying postscript to the whole affair. The fines, which at their peak had totaled nearly $10,000 on paper, vanished as if they had never existed. The only invoice that was paid was the one I had sent to the HOA for $250 for the inspection of my own pool. George insisted on paying it, framing the check and hanging it in the clubhouse as a reminder of the importance of facts, integrity, and reading the bylaws. The final chapter of Karen's downfall played out 6 months later. One of the line items on their pre-sale checklist was a full inspection of all property amenities, including the now infamous backyard water feature. One morning I got a call from George. "Mark," he said, a chuckle in his voice, "I've got a job for you. It's an official request for an inspection from the HOA. I'm sending over the work order now." When the email came through, I couldn't help but smile. The property to be inspected was Karen's old house. The specific task was to perform a full safety and compliance evaluation of the backyard aquatic installation. The circle was now complete. The next day, I pulled my work truck up to the curb of the house where this whole ordeal had begun. I grabbed my clipboard, my toolkit, and my camera. The yard was overgrown, a testament to months of neglect, and there in the center of it all was the water feature. It was even uglier up close. The water in the pond was a sickly green covered in a film of algae and dead leaves. The cheap plastic rocks were cracked, and the pump had long since seized up. I walked the perimeter, my inspector's eye catching dozens of violations in the first 60 seconds. The electrical junction box was not waterproof, and a live wire was dangling precariously close to the stagnant water. The foundation was uneven, causing one of the fake rock towers to list dangerously to the side. There was no safety fencing, no emergency shutoff, nothing that even remotely resembled a professionally installed feature. It was a perfect physical manifestation of Karen's entire presidency, a cheap, dangerous, and ultimately failed attempt to project an image of grandeur. I spent the next hour meticulously documenting every single flaw. I took photos, made notes, and tested circuits. My final report was 6 pages long and listed 27 distinct code violations, 14 of which I classified as critical safety hazards. I recommended that the entire structure be professionally dismantled and removed, as it was beyond repair and posed a significant liability risk. As I filled out the last page of the report, standing in that neglected backyard, a profound sense of quiet satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't a gloating or vengeful feeling. It was the simple, clean feeling of a job well done, of a problem identified and solved. The woman who had tried to ruin me over my perfectly safe, professionally built pool had been brought down in part by her own dangerously incompetent construction project. The rulebook she had tried to use as a weapon against me had ultimately become the instrument of her own undoing. I clicked my pen, signed my name at the bottom of the inspection report, and took one last look at the monument to her folly. The sun was shining, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the trees, and from my own backyard 2 streets over, I could hear the happy splash of water from a pool that was safe, secure, and finally, at peace. My community was healing, the tyrant was gone, and I had learned that sometimes the best way to protect your quiet life is to be willing to fight for it, armed with nothing more than the truth, a few good neighbors, and the fine print.